Hello and welcome to another revision session on American West. Today what we're going to be looking at is how important were women homesteaders on the Great Plains. In particular, we'll be comparing their farm work, family work, education work and work as a housekeeper, and be thinking about what the most important role was that they had and how important they were in general. Could people have survived without women homesteaders on the plains? Women were important in farm work. For example, they had to be very physically fit and strong. They ploughed fields, which is digging the soil and preparing the land in order to put plants in it. So they're sort of dragging large rakes along, or possibly, if they were lucky, using a horse to drag a large rake along to prepare the soil to plant things in it. They would also do things such as shooting at or trying to kill anything that's trying to eat or destroy their crops. So that might be snakes, it might be buffalo, it could be any type of vermin. Women were also important in family work. So for example, it was very difficult. The homesteaders often lived in very remote areas, and therefore if anyone in the family got ill, whether that be the husband or children or the wife themselves, they would be the ones who were expected to treat that illness, often maybe using herbs or mixtures of things that they could get hold of. So for example, a common cure for earache was actually the use of urine. They also helped keep the sod houses which they lived in clean, so getting rid of bugs or floods of water, sweeping out the dust. That may not sound that important, but when you consider that illnesses such as diphtheria were rife and killed many children in homesteaders' areas and in their houses, keeping the house clean was actually incredibly important, because remember, diphtheria spreads through things like dirty water. Additionally, women had an important role as educators. They taught the children at home, because often homesteaders lived in such remote areas, they weren't near neighbours, and therefore the only education children would get to read or write or take part in any type of farming or anything like that would come from the woman sharing whatever skills she happened to have. However, later on, in the later 1880s, when there were more homesteaders on the plains, the women were the ones who organised schools to be built, as well as religious buildings, and they were the ones who became the teachers in those schools, sometimes known as schoolmarms. And finally, they had a role as housekeepers. They created clothes and blankets and recreated clothes. They used every scrap of material they could. For example, for young children, when they were growing up, they had to kind of use the same materials to make and remake clothes as the child grew, or their husband's clothes or their own clothes as they got worn out. And blankets as well. They needed to make blankets, especially when the temperatures dropped to the extremes they could do in blizzards and things in the winter time. They also had to fix pans and any amount of any equipment that they had for their farming, because it was very difficult for many homesteaders to be able to afford to buy new things if they did break things, and also it was very difficult for them to get hold of them even if they could afford them, because they often lived in remote areas, not where there would be any kind of store for them to buy things from. Their other job was to keep the sod house in which they lived clean, fix anything if it was broken, mop up the flooding that occurred. So they had many, many roles, not just as mothers or as people who cooked food. See if you can have a go at these exam-style questions. The first one asks you to briefly describe the role of women homesteaders. Briefly describe the role of a woman homesteader. Because it's 5 marks, you need either 5 brief points or 2 explained points. A second exam style question: how useful is this source for telling us about the importance of women homesteaders? For this question, you need to say what is useful about the source, but also what is less useful, what does it miss out? So for example, what role does it show her fulfilling? Which one of these things that we've talked about is it useful for showing us she has a role for doing? And which one of them does it maybe miss out, not tell you about? Here you can see that she's collecting buffalo chips which could be used instead of wood for fuel, so to make fires, which would be good for housekeeping. So it's useful for that. But does it tell us any other things about a woman's role as a homesteader? What could you have in your less useful paragraph? What is less useful about this source? Have a go at these 2 exam style questions and make some of your own notes. That's the end of this podcast. Good luck with your revision.